400 years. That is the width of the silence. 400 years between the last sentence God spoke through a prophet and the first sentence he spoke through an angel standing beside an altar of incense. 4 centuries in which heaven, as far as any living soul could tell, said nothing at all. No vision, no dream, no burning bush, no fleece, no voice in the temple calling a boy's name in the quiet. The prophets who had thundered for 1,000 years simply stopped, and a whole people went on living and being born and burying their parents and praying into what seemed to be nothing. Now, do something for me, if your Bible is near enough to reach without getting up. Find the very end of Malachi, the last page of the Old Testament. Put your finger there, then turn one page, just one, and you are standing in Matthew, in the opening line of the New. One thin leaf of paper, that single sheet, no thicker than any other in the book, is 400 years wide. 20 generations lived and died in the turning of it. Empires rose and fell in that one page. And not a word from God the whole way through. Hold that, because before this letter is over, you are going to understand something about those 400 years that may change the way you hear your own silence. The one you have been living in for far longer than you ever expected to. My child, a letter arrived for you. It was written long before you were born, and yet every line carries your name. This is a letter from the Father, and when the Father speaks, every word is Scripture. I want you to settle now. Not to do anything, not to fix anything, not to be anyone other than who you already are in this quiet, just the chair you always choose, the room that has learned the shape of you over the years, the window you look through when your mind wanders off to the people and the seasons that are no longer close. Stay there. This was written for exactly where you are sitting, not for a stronger version of you, not for the you of years ago, who felt God so easily and prayed so confidently, but for this one, in that chair, holding the thing you have been holding for so long that you have half stopped noticing its weight. Let me speak plainly to you, my child, because you have lived a long life, and you have never once needed anyone to speak to you as though you were simple. You know what it is to pray into a stillness. You know what it is to ask a good and honest thing of God, for a child who wandered, for a body that will not mend, for a marriage, for a mind, for a home that grew quiet, and to ask it again and again, and then to notice, one unremarkable season, that you have begun to ask it with less expectation than you used to. Not because you stopped believing He can, because you stopped believing He will, in your lifetime, in your hearing, in a way you would recognize. That is a particular kind of ache, and it has a name in Scripture, and it has a history, and you are not the first to carry it. So let me take you into the strangest and most misunderstood stretch of the whole biblical story, the 400 years when the God who had never stopped speaking, stopped. We are going to walk through it slowly. We are going to look at what was happening on the earth, while heaven said nothing. And we are going to discover together that the silence was not empty, not for 1 hour of it. God was not absent from those 4 centuries. He was working in them with both hands, in the dark, on a scale no one alive could see. And every single thing He built in that silence was necessary for the moment the silence broke. If that is true of them, my child, then hear what I am about to say very carefully. It is true of you. I want to be careful with you here, because I am not going to sell you an easy comfort and call it Scripture. There's a kind of teaching that treats every hard stretch as though it were a puzzle with a tidy solution waiting at the back of the book, and you have lived far too long to be helped by that. What I am going to give you instead is something older and sturdier, a record, 400 years of it, a stretch of time in which the people of God were given no explanation whatsoever, and in which God was more at work on their behalf than in almost any other period of their history. You can lean your weight on a record. It does not depend on how you feel about it. Let me begin where the silence began. Picture an old man in Jerusalem, somewhere around 430 years before the birth of Christ. His name is Malachi, and he does not know it yet, but he is the last one. He is the final voice in a line that stretches back through Zechariah and Haggai, back through Jeremiah weeping over the city, back through Isaiah and his coal of fire, back through Elijah on the mountain, and Samuel as a boy in the tabernacle, back through Moses in the bush that burned and would not be consumed. For 1,000 years there had always been someone, always a man or a woman somewhere in Israel to whom God spoke, who could stand in a doorway or a courtyard and say the words that made every argument stop. Thus saith the Lord. Malachi is the end of that line. And what is striking, what I want you to see and to hold on to, is that no one told him. There was no announcement, no trumpet, no word from heaven saying, "This is the last message. Make it count. After this I will not speak again for 400 years." He simply wrote what he was given, and laid down the pen, and went about the rest of his ordinary life. And the silence began the way most silences begin, without anyone noticing that it had. Think about what that first year must have been like, though no one recognized it as the first. The people were poor. The temple they had rebuilt after the exile was a modest thing, a shadow of Solomon's glory, and everybody knew it. The priesthood was tired and half corrupted. Malachi had said so plainly. The nation was a small province, in a corner of the Persian Empire, taxed and unimportant, and they were waiting for the promises to come true, waiting for the glory to return, waiting for the God of their fathers to do again what he had always done. And nothing came. A year passed with no word, then 10, then a generation. There were children born in Jerusalem who grew old and died, having never once in their lifetime heard of a prophet arising in Israel. Their grandchildren grew old and died the same way. The scrolls were still read in the assembly. The feasts were still kept. The lambs were still slain. But the living voice, the one that had spoken to Abraham on a hill, and to Moses in a cloud, and to David through Nathan, that voice had gone quiet, and it stayed quiet, longer than anyone could hold their breath, longer than anyone could keep expecting. And maybe, as you listen to this, you know something about a silence that began without announcement. There was no day marked on your calendar when God stopped answering the way he used to. You cannot point to the moment. You only know that once prayer felt like conversation, and now it feels like speaking into a room where you are the only one who has stayed. But listen to me. Listen closely, because this is the hinge of everything that follows. Look at what the very last words of the Old Testament actually are. God did not end his speaking with a rebuke, or a warning, or a slammed door. He ended it with a promise about a messenger who was coming and a father's heart turning back toward his children. The final sentence before 400 years of silence was not a goodbye. It was an appointment. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord, whom ye seek, shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts." Malachi 3:1, KJV. "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers." Malachi 4:5-6, KJV. "For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak, and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry." Habakkuk 2:3, KJV. "And therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you, and therefore will he be exalted, that he may have mercy upon you. For the Lord is a God of judgment. Blessed are all they that wait for him." Isaiah 30:18, KJV. "Forever, O Lord, thy word is settled in heaven." Psalm 119:89, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Every one of those lines was already written down and settled and unbreakable before you were born and before your grandparents were born. And notice what the Father did at the doorway of the silence. He left a promise standing there like a lamp in a window. "Behold, he shall come." And then he let 400 years pass without repeating himself. Not because he had changed his mind, because a promise from God does not need to be repeated to remain true. It only needs to have been spoken once. My child, that is what your own silence is standing on. You do not need a fresh word to make the old one valid. The promises you learned as a younger person, the ones you could once recite without effort, the ones that steadied you in seasons far harder than this one, did not expire when you stopped feeling them. They are settled in heaven. They are not waiting on your emotions to confirm them. When Malachi laid down his pen, the promise did not go with him. It stayed, and it waited, and it kept every single word of itself for 400 years until the appointed hour came. And what was said over you, over your family, over the years you have given to the Father, that stands too in exactly the same way, in exactly the same heaven. So when you go back to your chair, and the room is as quiet as it has been, do not read that quiet as a withdrawal. Read it as the space between a promise and its appointed time. The vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it tarry, wait for it. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Before we go further into those 400 years, let me pause for just a moment and ask one small thing of you, free and quickly done. If this letter has already found you where you live, would you press the like button? That is all. One tap. It costs you nothing, and what it does is simple. It carries this letter to one more person who is sitting in a quiet room with the same ache, wondering whether God has gone silent on them. You will never meet them, but your one tap may be the reason the letter reaches their chair. The button is just below this letter. Press it once, and it is done. And while you are there, is there someone you are praying for? You don't need to tell the story. Just write "for my son," "for my sister," "for my friend" in the comments. and this family will pray with you. Now let me take you deeper into the silence. There is a question underneath the question, and I want to bring it up into the light where we can look at it together, because I think you have been carrying it in the dark, and it has grown heavier there than it deserves to be. The question is not really, why is God silent? The question is, what does his silence mean about me? That is the one that does the damage, because a silence left alone in the mind does not stay neutral. It gets filled, and what fills it is almost never kind. You pray for a season, and nothing seems to answer, and slowly the mind begins to supply reasons. Perhaps he is displeased with me. Perhaps there is something in my life I never dealt with, and this quiet is the consequence. Perhaps I asked too many times and wore out my welcome. Perhaps I am simply not the sort of person he speaks to. Those were other people, better people, people in books. I have watched this happen to faithful hearts for a long time. A person who has served God for 50 years, who taught the children, who visited the ones nobody visited, who gave when giving cost something. That person sits in a quiet room and slowly builds a case against themselves out of nothing but the absence of a voice. They take a silence, which is not a sentence, and they read it as a sentence. And then they carry the verdict around as though it had been handed down by God himself, when, in truth, no such thing was ever said. So let me say this to you plainly, before we go one step further. Silence is not a verdict. It is not a judgment. It is not evidence. Silence is the one thing in all the world that means nothing on its own, which is exactly why our fear can make it mean anything. Let me take you up a mountain to show you a man who learned this the hard way. Go back nearly 900 years before Christ to a cave in the side of Mount Horeb. There is a man in there who ought to be the most confident believer alive, and he is not. His name is Elijah, and only a short time before this, he had stood on Mount Carmel in front of an entire nation and called fire down out of a clear sky. He had seen God answer in the most spectacular way a man has ever been answered. And now he is here, in a cave, in the rock, hundreds of miles from that mountain, absolutely finished. A queen's threat has emptied him out. He has walked into the wilderness and asked God to take his life. He has eaten bread baked by an angel and gone on walking for 40 days into the desert until he found this hole in a mountain and crawled into it. And God asks him a question, and Elijah answers with the loneliest sentence in the Old Testament. I, even I only, am left. Now watch what happens, because it is one of the most carefully arranged scenes in all of Scripture. God tells him to come out and stand on the mountain, because the Lord is about to pass by. And a wind comes, not an ordinary wind, but a wind so violent that it tears the mountain apart and breaks the rocks into pieces. Elijah, of all men, would have expected God in that. He had seen fire fall. He was a man of the dramatic answer. But the text says something startling. The Lord was not in the wind. Then an earthquake. The ground itself convulsing, stone grinding on stone, the whole world unsteady, and the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then fire. The very element that had answered him on Carmel, the signature of every great moment of his ministry. And the Lord was not in the fire. And then, when the wind had spent itself, and the earth had stopped moving, and the fire had burned itself out, and there was nothing left on that mountain but the ringing quiet that follows enormous noise, then came a still small voice. a whisper, and Elijah, who had stood unmoved through the wind and the earthquake and the fire, wrapped his face in his mantle at the sound of it, and came out to the mouth of the cave, because he knew. That was God. Do you see what the Father was teaching him? He was teaching him that the absence of the spectacular is not the absence of God, that the God who can shatter a mountain does not always choose to, and that his choosing not to says nothing whatsoever about whether he is there. Elijah had built his whole understanding of God's nearness on volume, and God took the volume away, one layer at a time, wind, earthquake, fire, until there was only quiet left, and then spoke into the quiet, and in doing so rearranged what that prophet understood about the presence of God for the rest of his life. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where Elijah stood, at the mouth of your own cave, having survived the loud years, wondering why the God who once answered you so unmistakably has gone so quiet, and half convinced that the quiet is the answer. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "And he said, Go forth, and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And, behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire a still small voice." 1 Kings 19:11-12, KJV. "Verily, thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel the Savior." Isaiah 45:15, KJV. "O my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season, and am not silent." Psalm 22:2, KJV. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." Psalm 46:1, KJV. "Be still, and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words, they never were. And did you notice the strangest one? "Thou art a God that hidest thyself." That is not an accusation from an unbeliever. That is Isaiah worshiping. He puts the hiding and the saving in the same breath, in the same sentence, about the same God. "Thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel, the Savior." He had learned what Elijah learned on the mountain, and what 400 silent years would teach a whole nation, that hiddenness is something God does, not something God is. It is a posture, not a departure, and he remains the Savior the entire time he is doing it. So here is what I want you to carry back into your room, my child. When the quiet comes and your mind begins its old work of building a case against you out of it, stop it at the first sentence. Say it out loud if you need to. This proves nothing, because it does not. The people of Malachi's grandchildren's generation had 400 years of it, and the whole time, without a single word to reassure them, the Father was closer to his purpose for them than he had ever been. You are not being judged by the quiet. You are being kept in it. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Let me speak now to something the 400 years did to the people who lived through them, and something I suspect the years have done to you. It is the ache of the diminished thing, the ache of holding in the present something that is unmistakably smaller than what you once held. You know this one. You know it in the house, the rooms that used to be full and are not, the table that seated 9 at holidays and now seats 2 or 1. You know it in the body. the hands that did fine work and now do not quite obey, the stairs that used to be nothing, the strength you never had to think about because it was simply there, the way the floor is there. You know it in your own faith, if you are honest. You remember when your prayers had heat in them. You remember when a verse could land in your chest and reorganize your whole week, and now you keep the same practices with the same faithfulness, and they feel thinner, and you would never say so out loud to anyone, but you have said it to yourself. It is not what it was, and there is a particular grief in being the one who remembers. The younger people around you have nothing to compare it to. To them, this is simply how things are. You are the only one in the room who can still see, laid over the present, the shape of what used to stand here. That is a lonely kind of sight. It makes you feel less like a survivor and more like a witness at something nobody else knows is a funeral. The people who walked into those 400 silent years were carrying exactly this. And there is a scene near the beginning of it all that says it better than anything I could tell you. Go back to Jerusalem, about a century before Malachi laid down his pen. The exiles have come home from Babylon, a fraction of them, poor, weary, walking back into a city that is mostly rubble. And they begin to rebuild the temple. They lay the foundation, and when it is finished, they hold a service. The priests come out in their vestments with trumpets. The Levites take up cymbals. The whole assembly is there in the open air among the stones, and they begin to sing the old song, the one their fathers sang, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever toward Israel. And the young men shout for joy. Of course they do. They were born in Babylon. They have never seen a temple. This foundation, this outline of stone in the dust, is the most magnificent thing they have ever stood in front of, and they shout until their voices break. But scattered through that crowd are the old men, the ancient men, Scripture calls them, the ones who had seen the first house. They were boys when Solomon's temple still stood before the Babylonians burned it. They remember the gold, they remember the cedar and the carved cherubim and the sheer overwhelming glory of it, and they are looking at this small foundation, this modest outline, and they are weeping. Weeping with a loud voice, the text says, not politely, not privately, and here's the detail that stops me every time I read it. The shouting and the weeping happened at the same moment, in the same place, so mixed together that no one standing nearby could tell them apart. The people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. One sound went up from that hillside, and it was made of both, and it carried a long way. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing in that crowd. One of the ones who remembers, holding a joy and a grief that have become impossible to separate. Singing the old song with tears running down your face because you can see what is missing and nobody else can. Now hear what God said to that generation through the prophet Haggai when the disappointment had settled in and the older ones were quietly certain that the best days were behind them. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words, "Who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? And how do ye see it now? Is it not in your eyes in comparison of it as nothing?" Haggai 2:3 KJV. Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, saith the Lord, and be strong, O Joshua, son of Josedech, the high priest, and be strong, all ye people of the land, saith the Lord, and work, for I am with you, saith the Lord of hosts. Haggai 2:4 KJV. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than of the former, saith the Lord of hosts. And in this place will I give peace, saith the Lord of hosts. Haggai 2:9, KJV. For who hath despised the day of small things? Zechariah 4:10, KJV. Then he answered and spake unto me, saying, This is the word of the Lord unto Zerubbabel, saying, Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. Zechariah 4:6, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look at what the Father did there. He did not scold them for grieving. He asked the question himself, Who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? He named the loss out loud before they had to defend it. He acknowledged in his own voice that in their eyes this was as nothing compared with what had been. God does not require you to pretend that the smaller thing is the bigger thing. He never once asked that of them. But then he said something they could not possibly have understood at the time. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than of the former. Greater. This plain, modest, disappointing building would hold more glory than Solomon's had, and they had no idea what he meant. They could not have, because the fulfillment was 500 years down the road, on the far side of the silence, when a young mother and a carpenter would carry an 8-day-old infant up those very steps and into those very courts, and the glory of God in the flesh would be inside that building. Solomon's temple held the presence in a cloud behind a curtain. This one would hold him in a pair of human arms, and an old woman would see it happen. They wept over the foundation of the house that would one day hold the Christ. My child, hear this. You are not a good judge of the glory of your own present season. Neither were they. Everything they could measure told them this was less, and by every measure they had, they were right, and they were also entirely wrong, because the measure that mattered was still 400 years away, and moving toward them the whole time. So, when you sit in the quieter house, in the smaller life, doing the diminished version of what you once did with such strength, I am not going to ask you to call it what it is not. Weep if you need to. They did, and God recorded it without a word of rebuke. But do not conclude. Do not take what your eyes can measure and file it as the final report. The day of small things has never once been despised by the one who is actually keeping the record. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Now, I want to take you out of the quiet room and up to a height, because there is something you cannot see from where you are sitting, and it is the single most important fact about those 400 years. Here is the ache I want to name first. It is the feeling that nothing is happening. Not that things are going badly, necessarily. Just that they are not moving. The days have a sameness to them that has worn a groove. You wake, and the shape of the day is already known to you before your feet touch the floor. The same rooms, the same handful of tasks, the same prayer said in the same words about the same situation that has not changed in years. And somewhere in there a thought settles in that is more corrosive than grief. My life has stopped going anywhere. God is not doing anything with me, or for me, or through me. I am simply here, running out the clock, and it does not help that the people around you, meaning nothing but kindness, keep affirming the very thing you fear. They tell you to rest. They tell you that you have done your part, that you have earned this, that it is somebody else's turn now, Every word of it is meant well, and every word of it lands as a verdict, as though your active life is a thing now spoken of in the past tense by common agreement. I want you to hear how completely the 400 years demolish that thought. Because from the ground in Jerusalem, absolutely nothing was happening. No prophet, no miracle, no word. A small province, a modest temple, a tired priesthood, the same feasts turning over year after year. If you had asked a devout man in Jerusalem in the year 340, before Christ, what God was doing, he would have told you honestly, nothing that I can see, nothing for 100 years. He was standing in the middle of one of the most furious periods of divine activity in the history of the world. Let me show you. In 336 before Christ, a young man of 20 took the throne of a rough kingdom in the north of Greece, a place nobody in Jerusalem had any reason to think about. His name was Alexander. Within 4 years, he had smashed the Persian Empire, the superpower that had ruled the known world for 2 centuries. He moved with a speed that ancient historians could barely describe. He took Asia Minor, then Syria, then Egypt, then the heart of Persia itself, marching all the way to the edge of India. And he did it before he was 33 years old, and then he died, suddenly, in Babylon with no heir who could hold what he had taken, and his empire tore into 4 pieces among his generals. That happened in the silence. No prophet in Israel announced it. No word came from heaven about it. But it had already been announced, 200 years earlier. Go back to an old man beside a river in Babylon, a captive civil servant with a habit of praying 3 times a day at an open window. Daniel. And God gave him a vision of a ram with 2 horns, standing by a river, pushing westward and northward and southward, and no beast could stand before it. And then, out of the west, a goat came across the face of the whole earth, and Daniel notices something impossible about it. The goat touched not the ground. It moved so fast it did not seem to touch the earth at all, and this goat had a single notable horn between his eyes, and it ran at the ram in the fury of its power, and broke both its horns, and cast it to the ground, and trampled it. And then, at the height of its strength, the great horn was broken, and in its place 4 came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Daniel did not understand it, and the angel told him plainly what it was. The ram was the kingdom of Media and Persia. The goat was Greece. The great horn was its first king, and when that horn was broken, 4 kingdoms would stand up in its place, but not with his power. 200 years before Alexander of Macedon was born, God described his speed, his conquest of Persia, his death at the peak of his strength, and the 4-fold division of his empire among his generals, and then wrote it down and let it sit in a scroll, while century after century passed, and nobody in Jerusalem heard a fresh word from heaven. And maybe, as you listen, you are somewhere in your own long stretch of days where nothing seems to be moving, while the Father is moving the whole map around you, on a scale you have no window to see. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words, "Blessed be the name of God for ever and ever, for wisdom and might are His. And He changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings, and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding." Daniel 2:20-21, KJV. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. Daniel 8:21-22, KJV. He increaseth the nations, and destroyeth them. He enlargeth the nations, and straighteneth them again. Job 12:23, KJV. Remember the former things of old. For I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Isaiah 46:9-10, KJV. For promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He putteth down one, and setteth up another. Psalm 75:6-7, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done. That is a sentence about the 400 years, and it is a sentence about the years you are in. My child, I want to be careful here, because I am not going to insult you with an easy comfort. I am not telling you that something dramatic is about to happen to you next week. I do not know that, and neither does anyone who tells you they do. What I am telling you is far steadier than that, and far more useful. You do not have the instruments to measure what God is doing. You never did. Neither did the faithful people in Jerusalem during those 4 centuries, and they were living inside the greatest preparation in human history. The quality of your season is not measured by how much of it you can perceive. The absence of visible movement in your life is exactly as meaningless as the absence of visible movement in theirs, which is to say, completely. He changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings, and setteth up kings. He did all of it without sending one word to Jerusalem to explain himself, and he did not owe them the explanation, and the work was flawless the entire time. So take this back to your chair with you. Nothing is happening is not a fact about your life. It is a report from an instrument that has never been able to read this. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Let me stay with the silence, but bring you closer to the ground now, because God was not only moving empires in those years. He was doing something much quieter, in a library, with ink. And the ache I want to speak to here is one of the most private ones you carry. It is the fear that your faithfulness did not produce anything. You gave your years. You prayed for people who never knew you were praying for them. You raised children in the faith, and some of them walk in it, and some of them do not. And you have long since stopped being able to tell which of your efforts mattered. You taught a class for 11 years, and the church does not run that class anymore. You cared for someone through a long decline, day after day, in a way nobody outside the house ever saw. And at the end of it, they were gone, and the house was quiet, and there was no ceremony for what you had done. You were faithful in 100 small, unrecorded ways, and now you are old enough to be honest. And the honest question comes, what did any of it build? I want to tell you about a room in Egypt, around 250 years before Christ. Deep in the silence, roughly halfway through it, the city of Alexandria was the intellectual center of the world. It had a library that was trying to collect every book in existence, and the king of Egypt at that time, a Greek ruler named Ptolemy, wanted the sacred writings of the Jews in his collection, in Greek, so they could be read. There was also a practical need on the Jewish side that mattered more. There were now enormous Jewish communities living outside the land, in Egypt, in Syria, all across the Greek-speaking world, and their children were growing up speaking Greek. A generation was rising that could not read the Hebrew of its own scriptures. The book was becoming unreadable to the very people it had been given to. So, a body of Jewish scholars went to work. Tradition says there were 70 of them, or 72, and the translation has carried the number in its name ever since, the Septuagint. And they did the slow, unglamorous, eye-straining labor of carrying the Hebrew scriptures over into Greek, word by word, line by line, book by book, over a period of many years. Picture it honestly, because it was not romantic. Men bent over tables, lamplight and squinting, arguments over a single word. How do you render this Hebrew term for covenant love into a Greek that has no equivalent for it? Weeks lost to a difficult passage. Copyists' cramped hands. Scholars who began the work and died before it was finished, and younger men who took up the same section and went on. There would have been a supervisor pacing behind them, and a young man whose only job was to trim the lamps and refill the ink, and the smell of papyrus and cedar oil, and the particular fatigue of eyes that have looked at small letters for too many hours. It was, in every ordinary sense, a job. Not one of them received a word from heaven telling them this mattered. There was no prophet in Israel to bless the project. They were simply faithful people, in the silence, doing careful work with a book they loved, because somebody's grandchildren needed to be able to read it. Now let me tell you what they were actually building. 300 years later, a man named Paul walks into a synagogue in a Greek city, Thessalonica, Corinth, Ephesus, and he reasons with them out of the Scriptures, in Greek from that translation. When the writers of the New Testament quote the Old, again and again, they are quoting the Septuagint, because it was the Bible the world could read. When the gospel went out to the nations, it went out into a world that already had the Hebrew Scriptures in the common language of the empire, the prophecies, the Psalms, the promise of a suffering servant, all of it already sitting on shelves in Greek from Spain to Persia, waiting for 3 centuries for someone to walk in and say, "This one has come." Those scholars in Alexandria died believing they had done a useful piece of work for their own community. What they had actually done was lay the roadbed for the gospel to travel the whole known world. And maybe, as you listen, you are one of the ones bent over the table, doing careful, unwitnessed, unrewarded work that you cannot see the point of, in a silence that has never once told you it mattered. And this is what the Father says to you. In His own words, "The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of our God shall stand forever." Isaiah 48, KJV. "So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it." Isaiah 55:11, KJV. "For God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which ye have showed toward His name, in that ye have ministered to the saints, and do minister." Hebrews 6:10, KJV. "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, forasmuch as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." 1 Corinthians 15:58, KJV. "For the Lord loveth judgment, and forsaketh not His saints. They are preserved forever." Psalm 37:28, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love. Sit with the strangeness of that phrasing for a moment. It does not say God chooses not to forget as a kindness. It says forgetting would be unrighteous. It would be a wrong. It would be beneath His character. Your labor of love is held in place by the justice of God, not merely by His affection, and that is a far sturdier thing to lean on, because affection can be doubted on a bad day, and the righteousness of God cannot be moved at all. And notice the promise about the word. It shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. Not the thing you sent it to, the thing He sent it to. Those translators sent their work to a Greek-speaking synagogue in Alexandria. He sent it to the Roman Empire. They were not wrong about the destination. They were simply told about the near one and not the far one. My child, that is almost certainly true of you. The verse you spoke to a child 40 years ago, who does not appear to have kept it. The years of prayer for a person who has not turned yet. The quiet ministry nobody thanked you for. You know the near destination of your labor, and by that measure some of it looks like it went nowhere. You do not know the far one. You will not know it here. But it is not in vain. That is not encouragement. That is Scripture. And it is settled in heaven whether you feel it or not. The work you did in the silence is doing something. It is simply doing it out of your sight, the way 70 tired men in Alexandria built a road for the gospel and went to their graves thinking they had translated some books. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. I have to bring you now to the darkest stretch of the 400 years, and I am not going to soften it, because you have lived long enough that softened things are of no use to you. The ache here is the hardest one in this whole letter. It is the ache of watching something evil go unanswered. You know what I mean. It may be something in the world. You have watched, over a long life, things become permitted that you were raised to believe would never be permitted, and you have prayed about it and watched it advance anyway. Or it may be something much closer and much smaller and much worse. Someone who hurt a person you love and was never called to account for it. A wrong done inside a family that everybody agreed to be quiet about. A person who lied and prospered by it, and you took it to God, honestly, as a believing person does, and nothing happened. The wrong stood, the person prospered, and heaven said nothing. And what makes it worse is that you have been quietly taught, somewhere along the way, that a mature believer ought to be past this by now. That a settled faith would have laid the matter down years ago. So you carry the wrong, and you carry a second weight on top of it. Shame at still being troubled by something so old. That is a wound that does not heal by being ignored. And I am not going to ask you to stop feeling it. But I want to put it inside a story that is bigger than yours, because that is where it belongs. Around 170 years before Christ, a king took the Seleucid throne in Syria. His name was Antiochus IV, and he gave himself the title Epiphanes, God manifest. The people who suffered under him changed one letter of it behind his back and called him Epimanes, the madman. He decided that his empire would be culturally unified, and that the stubborn faith of the Jews would be eliminated. What followed was, in the strict sense, the first organized attempt in history to destroy the worship of the God of Israel by law. He outlawed the Sabbath. He outlawed circumcision, and executed mothers who did it anyway, and hung their infants around their necks. He ordered the copies of the Scriptures found and burned, and made possession of them a capital offense. He forbade the daily sacrifice. And then, in the year 167, he came into Jerusalem, went up into the temple courts, into the house that Haggai had promised would hold a greater glory, and he set up an altar to Zeus over the altar of God, and on it, in the holy place, he sacrificed a pig, and had its broth poured over the sanctuary and over the scrolls. Understand what that was. That was not a foreign army pillaging a city. That was a deliberate theological desecration, an act designed to say, in the loudest possible way, to every faithful Jew alive, "Your God is nothing. He is not here, and he will not stop me." And God did not stop him. Not that day, not with fire, not with a plague, not with an angel in the temple court. The pig burned on the altar, and heaven was silent. Somewhere in Jerusalem, in those weeks, there were old men and women who had kept the faith their whole lives, sitting in ruined houses, who could not understand it. And out of that period, or out of one very like it, came a psalm that is one of the most honest things in all of Scripture. Whoever wrote Psalm 74 had watched enemies roar in the middle of the congregation, watched the carved work of the sanctuary broken down with axes and hammers, watched the synagogues burned, and he wrote a line that says everything about a silence like this one, and everything about yours. We see not our signs. There is no more any prophet, neither is there among us any that knoweth how long. Read that again slowly. There is no more any prophet, and then, not one of us knows how long this goes on. That is a man of God writing down, in the middle of the worship book of Israel, that he has no idea when it ends and nobody can tell him. And God let that sentence stand in the Scriptures forever uncorrected, because he is not embarrassed by the honest grief of his people. And maybe, as you listen, that is your own sentence, the one you have never said in a church, in those words, "I see no signs, and there is no one to tell me, and nobody knows how long." And this is what the Father says to you. In his own words, "We see not our signs. There is no more any prophet, neither is there among us any that knoweth how long." Psalm 74:9, KJV. "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall mine enemy be exalted over me?" Psalm 13:1-2, KJV. "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save." Habakkuk 1:2, KJV. "Rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself, because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass." Psalm 37:7, KJV. "For yet a little while, and the wicked shall not be. Yea, thou shalt diligently consider his place, and it shall not be." Psalm 37:10, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Now, I want you to notice something that I hope will steady you for a long time. Every one of those first 3 verses is a complaint. How long wilt thou forget me? How long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? There is no more any prophet, and nobody knows how long. Those are not the words of the faithless. Those are Scripture. God put the questions of his grieving people into his own book and signed his name to the page, which means this: the question you have been ashamed of asking has been in the Bible the entire time you have been afraid to ask it. You have been apologizing for a prayer that God himself preserved and canonized and gave to the whole church to pray. He was never once offended by how long. He wrote it down. And what of Antiochus, who was so certain there was no God to stop him? 3 years, that is all he got. 3 years from the pig on the altar to the day the sanctuary was cleansed again, which is the story I am going to tell you next. Thou shalt diligently consider his place, and it shall not be. Within a decade he was dead in a foreign province, his name a curse, his empire coming apart. The altar he defiled was rebuilt. The scrolls he burned are being read aloud in your language, in your room, right now, on the other side of the world, 2,200 years after he ordered every copy destroyed. He had the whole power of an empire and 3 years of unbroken success. And he lost. My child, God's silence in the face of a wrong is not consent to it. It is not weakness, and it is not indifference, and it is not the end of the matter. It is only the part of the story you are being asked had to stand in without seeing the end of. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Let me tell you what happened next, because it begins with an old man in a village nobody had heard of, and I think you will recognize him. First, the ache, and this one is close to the bone for a great many people who will hear this letter. It is the ache of being too small to matter now. There was a season when you could act. When something was wrong, you did something about it. You made the calls. You drove the distance. You stood up in the meeting. You took the person in. You put your hands and your money and your hours where your convictions were. And now your reach has shortened. You cannot drive at all, or not far. Your name does not carry the weight it used to in the places it used to carry weight. You watch things go wrong in your family or your church or your town, and you can see exactly what ought to be done, and you have neither the strength nor the standing nor the years to do it. So you pray about it, which is what people tell you to do, and it feels, I will be honest on your behalf, it feels like being handed a consolation prize. Hold that thought, and come with me to a village called Modine, about 17 miles from Jerusalem, in the year 167 before Christ. The king's officers have come out from the city with a portable altar and a detachment of soldiers, and they are going village by village. The procedure is simple. Gather the people, and require one respected man from the town to offer a pagan sacrifice publicly, so that everyone else will follow. The officer looks over the crowd at Modine and picks the obvious man, an aging country priest named Mattathias, with grown sons standing behind him. He has offered the king's friendship and gifts of silver and gold and honor for his family. All he has to do is step forward and offer. Now, understand who this man is. He is not a general. He is not a leader of the nation. He is not young. He is a rural priest at the end of a long, ordinary life of quiet faithfulness. The kind of man who had done everything right for 60 years and never once been asked to do anything that history would notice. And he says no, in front of the soldiers, in front of the town, in front of his own sons who will have to live with what he does next. He refuses. And when another man from the village steps up to do it in his place, something breaks open in the old priest, and he acts. And by the end of that hour, there is no going back for him or for anyone standing near him. He tore down the altar, and then he went through the village calling out one sentence, "Whoever is zealous for the law and maintains the covenant, let him follow me." And he took his sons and went up into the hill country with nothing. That is how it started. An elderly man and his family in caves against the Seleucid Empire. Mattathias died within a year or so. He did not see any of it finished. But his son Judas took command, a man they nicknamed the Hammer, Maccabeus, and with a force that was outnumbered in every single engagement, fighting in the hills, they beat professional armies 4 times over. And in December of the year 164, 3 years almost to the day after the altar was defiled, they walked back into Jerusalem and up into the temple. Picture it. Grass growing in the courts, the gates burned, the chambers pulled down, the great altar polluted beyond any cleansing, so that they argued about what to do with the stones, and finally took it apart, and stored the stones in a corner of the Temple Mount until a prophet should come and tell them what to do with them. A line that tells you everything about that generation. They were so accustomed to the silence that they simply built the waiting into their arrangements. They made a new altar of unhewn stone. They made new vessels, and they brought in the lampstand, and lit the lamps, and light came out of the windows of the house of God in Jerusalem for the first time in 3 years. And they held 8 days of dedication, with singing, and the whole assembly fell on their faces. That feast is still kept. And there is a verse in the Gospel of John that I want you to hold in your hands like a coin, because of what it proves. John records, almost in passing, that Jesus was in Jerusalem at the feast of the dedication, walking in the temple in Solomon's porch. The Son of God, in a human body, walked through a temple court that an old country priest and his sons had won back, and celebrated the feast that commemorated it. And maybe, as you listen, you are Mattathias in the crowd at Modian, old, unimportant, with no army and no plan, entirely certain that whatever you do at this point cannot possibly change anything. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch." John 10:22 and 23, KJV. For there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. 1 Samuel 14:6, KJV. For the Lord your God is he that goeth with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. Deuteronomy 20:4, KJV. For they got not the land in possession by their own sword, neither did their own arm save them, but thy right hand, and thine arm, and the light of thy countenance, because thou hadst a favor unto them. Psalm 44:3, KJV. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. 1 Corinthians 1:27, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. There is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. That sentence was spoken by a young man about to attack an army with one companion, and it has been true in every century since. And it was true in the hill country of Judea, in a generation that had not heard from God in 250 years. Now here is what I want you to take away, my child, and it is not what you might expect. I am not telling you that you should go and do something dramatic. You may not be able to, and that is not a failure. What I am telling you is that the whole calculation you have been running about your own smallness is being run with the wrong numbers. Mattathias did not save the temple. He refused one thing in a village square and died, and never saw the lamps lit. What he did was be faithful in the one moment that was actually in front of him, not the big thing, the near thing, and God took it up into a work that ran on for centuries past his grave and ended with Christ walking through the courts his sons cleaned. You still have the near thing. You have the words you say to the grandchild who calls. You have the refusal to join a conversation that is tearing someone down. You have the prayer, which is not a consolation prize and never was. You have the way you bear what you are bearing, which is being watched by more people than you know. Faithfulness in a small square on an ordinary day is exactly how God has always started the things that outlast empires. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. I have to tell you the next part of the story, and it is not the part anyone wants. But you have lived long enough to know that most stories have this chapter in them, and I would not be honest with you if I skipped it. The ache here is one that faithful people almost never admit to, because it sounds ungrateful. It is the ache of the answered prayer that did not fix it. You prayed for something for years, and then it came. The person came home. The surgery worked. The job appeared. The relationship was restored. You wept and you thanked God, and you meant every word. And then the years went on, and the thing you were given did not turn out to be the thing you thought it was. The person came home and was not who they had been. The health returned and something else began. The restored relationship became a different kind of hard, and you have never once said out loud what you have thought in the quiet. It did not last, and it was not enough, and I do not know how to say that to God without sounding like a person who was never grateful in the first place. There is another version of it, too, and it may be closer to your own. The answer came, but it came so long after you asked that you had already been changed by the asking. The healing arrived after the years it was meant to save had already gone. The reconciliation came in the last months, when there was no time left to build anything on it. You were grateful. You are still grateful. And underneath the gratitude there is a grief you have never had anywhere to put. It came, and it was real, and it was too late to be what you had prayed for. I am not going to talk you out of that. It is an honest sorrow, and honest sorrows are safe in this letter, but I want to put it beside something, so that it is not the only thing you are holding. Let me show you a whole nation living in that exact place. After the temple was cleansed, the family of Mattathias became the rulers of Judea. The Hasmoneans, they are called. And for about 100 years, for the only time between the exile and the modern age, the Jewish people governed themselves in their own land. The prayer of 5 generations had been answered. Independence, a cleansed temple, a Jewish ruler in Jerusalem, and it went bad. Not immediately, and not all at once, but steadily and then completely. The high priesthood, which was supposed to be a sacred office held by God's appointment, became a political prize fought over by brothers. The Hasmonean rulers took the title of king, though they were not of the line of David, and combined it with the priesthood in a way that troubled devout people deeply. There were purges. There was a civil war. One Hasmonean ruler crucified 800 of his own countrymen in Jerusalem, and, according to the historian who recorded it, feasted with his wives while it was done, in view of the dying. The grandsons of the men who had cleansed the temple were killing each other for the right to control it. And it ended the way that kind of thing usually ends. Two Hasmonean brothers, at war with each other over the throne, both appealed to the rising power in the west to settle it, and Rome came. In the year 63 before Christ, the Roman general Pompey took Jerusalem, and when the fighting was over, he did the thing that no one, not even Antiochus, who did it as blasphemy, should ever have done casually. He walked into the temple, through the courts, through the holy place, and he pulled back the veil and stepped into the Holy of Holies out of nothing more than curiosity. And the ancient account says he was baffled by what he found, because there was nothing in it. No statue, no image, no golden idol, an empty room. He could not comprehend a God who could not be looked at. And then he walked out, ordered the temple services resumed the next day, and left. And Judea belonged to Rome. 100 years of hard-won freedom, ending with a foreign general standing in the Holy of Holies, unimpressed. If you had been an old believer in Jerusalem in that year, you would have had every reason to conclude that God's silence had finally been explained, and the explanation was the worst one. He had answered once, and it had come to nothing, and now it was over. And maybe, as you listen, you are somewhere on that road, holding the wreckage of an answer you once thanked God for, wondering what the point of the asking was. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words, "Put not your trust in princes, nor in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help." Psalm 146:3, KJV. Thus saith the Lord, "Cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from the Lord." Jeremiah 17:5, KJV. Blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, and whose hope the Lord is. Jeremiah 17:7, KJV. Some trust in chariots, and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. Psalm 27, KJV. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. Psalm 118:8-9, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Here is what I believe those 100 years were for. And it is a hard mercy, and I want to hand it to you carefully. The people had been praying for deliverance, and God gave them exactly what they asked for. A cleansed temple, a Jewish king, an independent nation, and then let them find out, over 4 generations, that it could not save them, not because He was cruel, but because the thing they were about to be given was so much greater than the thing they were asking for, that they had to be taught, slowly and at cost, that the answer was never going to be a government. By the time Christ was born, Judea had tried everything: Persian rule, Greek rule, martyrdom, revolution, independence, dynasty, Rome. Every possible political answer had been attempted and had failed, and into a nation that had exhausted every alternative, the actual answer came. And He was not a king in a palace, and He did not raise an army, and He was born to a young woman in a stable in a town of no importance. They would never have received Him at the height of the Maccabean triumph. They had to come to the end of what they could win for themselves. My child, I am not going to tell you that your disappointment was a lesson God arranged for your improvement. I do not know that, and it would be a cheap thing to say. But I will tell you this, which is not cheap and is not speculation. every answer that has ever failed you failed because it was not Him. Not because prayer does not work, because the thing given was a gift, and gifts are not saviors, and no gift ever was. Put not your trust in princes. The princes in your life may have been good people and good things. They were still princes. He is not. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Now I want to show you the most beautiful thing God built in the silence, and it was built out of a loss. But first, let me name the ache, because this one belongs to almost everyone who will hear this letter. It is the ache of the shrinking world. There was a time when your life had scope. You went places. You had a role that put you in rooms with people, and responsibilities that mattered to somebody, and a calendar you had to actually consult. You served in ways that required your presence. You cooked for the fellowship. You drove the van. You sat with the family at the hospital. You ran the thing that would not have run without you. And now, by degrees you did not choose, the circumference has come in. Perhaps you cannot drive any more, and someone else decides when you leave the house. Perhaps the church you gave 40 years to is a place you now watch on a screen, because getting there and back is more than the body will do. Perhaps caring for someone at home has narrowed your world to 4 rooms and a schedule of medications. Your world used to be a country. Now it is a house, and some days it is a chair. And the thought that comes with that, the one that arrives uninvited, is that a life this small cannot possibly be of any use to God anymore. Whatever you were for it back when you could go and do. Now you are only being kept. I want to take you to Babylon, and then I want to show you what that loss became. 600 years before Christ, the temple was burned and the people were carried off. And whatever else that catastrophe took from them, it took the entire structure of their worship. Everything they knew how to do with God required a building in Jerusalem that no longer existed. The sacrifices could not be offered anywhere else. The priesthood had nothing to serve. The feasts required a place they were 1,000 miles from. Their faith had been built around a location, and the location was ash. The psalm from that period asks the question exactly. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And they had no answer. So they did the only thing left. In the towns of Babylon, in ordinary houses, small groups of Jews began to gather, with no temple, no altar, no sacrifice, no priest performing anything, simply to read the scriptures aloud, and pray, and remind each other who they were. That was all it was. It had no ceremony. It was not commanded in the law of Moses. It was what was left when everything else had been taken. And in the middle of that, God said something to Ezekiel that I want you to hear, as though it were addressed to your house. He told the exiles that although he had scattered them among the countries, he himself would be to them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they should come. A little sanctuary. Not the great house on the hill. A small one. God saying, I will be a small holy place wherever you happen to be standing. That practice of gathering became the synagogue. And through the whole 400 years of silence, while there was no prophet and no fresh word, it spread. Not by decree. Nobody organized it. Wherever there were 10 Jewish households in a town, anywhere in the Persian, then the Greek, then the Roman world, there came to be a room where the scriptures were read on the Sabbath. By the time of Christ, there were synagogues from Spain to Mesopotamia, and one in nearly every city of the empire, and one in almost every village of Galilee, including a small one in a town called Nazareth, where a boy grew up hearing the scroll of Isaiah read aloud, and where he would one day stand up to read it himself. Now follow the line all the way out. When the gospel went into the world, how did it travel? Paul walks into a city, Antioch, Iconium, Thessalonica, Corinth, Athens, Rome, and in every single one of them there is already a room full of people who already believe in one God, who already know the prophets, who already have the scriptures in a language everyone can read, and who are already waiting for a Messiah. He does not have to build any of that. It took 400 silent years to build it, and it was built by exiles who thought they were only making do. The gospel ran across the Roman Empire on a network of little sanctuaries that God constructed out of a people's worst loss. And maybe, as you listen, you are in your own small sanctuary, a room far smaller than the life you used to have, wondering whether anything holy can happen in a space this size. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words. Therefore say, Thus saith the Lord God, Although I have cast them far off among the heathen, and although I have scattered them among the countries, yet will I be to them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they shall come. Ezekiel 11-16, KJV. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Matthew 18:20, KJV. If any of thine be driven out unto the outmost parts of heaven, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. Deuteronomy 34, KJV. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning, and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. Psalm 139, 7-10, KJV. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. Psalm 139:3, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Yet will I be to them as a little sanctuary. My child, take that phrase and put it on the wall of the room you are in, because there's a lie built into the way most of us were taught to think about the presence of God, and the 400 years dismantled it. We were taught, without anyone ever saying it directly, that God's presence is concentrated in certain places and certain activities and certain quantities of them: the building, the gathering, the service, the sanctuary. And so when age or illness or distance or duty takes those things away, we quietly assume that our access has been reduced along with our mobility. It has not. It never was a matter of access. The little sanctuary is not a lesser arrangement for people who can no longer get to the real one. It is God's own word for what He becomes when the Great One is out of reach. Thou compassest my path and my lying down. He is not waiting for you at the church. He is in the 4 rooms. He is in the chair. He has been in this house the entire time, and He has never once regarded it as a downgrade. And I will say one thing more, because it follows from the story, and I think you need it. Those exiles gathering in a house in Babylon had no idea they were inventing the vessel that would carry the gospel to the nations. They thought they were coping. They thought they were making do until things went back to normal. You do not know what your small room is building either. You only know it is small. That is exactly what they knew, and it was the least important fact about it. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. There is a group of people in those 400 years that history did not record, and I want to spend this part of the letter with them because I believe you are one of them. The ache first, and this one may be the loneliest in the whole letter. It is the ache of being the last one who still believes it. You are the one in your family who still prays. You may be the only one now. There was a generation above you that believed, and they are gone, and you buried the last of them. And the generation below you, the children you raised in it, the ones you carried to church before they could walk, the ones you taught to fold their hands, some of them have quietly let it go. They are not hostile about it. That would almost be easier. They are kind, and they are busy, and they think of your faith as a lovely thing that belongs to you personally, the way a taste in music belongs to someone. So you pray for them, alone, for decades, and you have watched nothing change. And you have gotten older, and the arithmetic has begun to press on you. How many more years can I hold this? And what happens to these prayers when I am not here to pray them any more? Who prays for my son when I am gone? I want to tell you about the people who prayed through 400 years of silence, and I want to tell you what God did with them. We do not have their names. Not one. There is no book of the Bible written in those 4 centuries, because there was no prophet to write it. Nobody kept the record. But we know they were there, because of what we find on the other side of the silence. When you open the Gospel of Luke, you find a whole community of people who have been doing something for a very long time. Zacharias and Elizabeth, both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless, in an old age with no children, and no visible reward for any of it. Simeon in Jerusalem, described as just and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel. Anna in the temple, worshiping with fastings and prayers. And Luke mentions, almost in passing, that Anna spoke of the child to all them that looked for redemption in Jerusalem. All of them. There was a group, a whole quiet company of people in that city who had spent their lives looking for a redemption that had been promised 400 years before they were born, that nobody had said a word about since, and that every reasonable person around them had long ago stopped expecting. They were the last ones who still believed it, and they held on, in a nation that had drifted through generation after generation of nothing. Now think about the ones behind them, because those people in Luke chapter 2 did not invent that hope. Somebody taught it to them, which means there was a mother in the 2nd century before Christ who taught it to a child, and that child taught it to another child, and so on down a chain of ordinary, unrecorded households for 20 generations, every link of it holding on to a promise made by a prophet nobody had heard from in centuries. Not one of those people saw it come true. 19 generations of them died still waiting, and every single one of them was necessary, because the chain does not reach Zacharias in the temple if any one of them lets go. And here is the part I have been waiting to tell you. Right at the doorway of the silence, in the second to last chapter, God spoke. Before he stopped speaking, he looked ahead and saw exactly these people, and he said something about them. Malachi says that they that feared the Lord spake often one to another, the faithful few, talking to each other, keeping each other steady in a bad season. And then this, and the Lord hearkened and heard it. He was leaning in, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord, and that thought upon his name. A book of remembrance. God, on the eve of 400 years of saying nothing, opened a record and began writing down the names of the people who would keep believing him through it. And maybe, as you listen, you are in that book, one more unrecorded link in a chain you cannot see the end of, holding a promise for people who are not yet born. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. Then they that feared the Lord spake often one to another. And the Lord hearkened, and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord, and that thought upon his name. And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels. And I will spare them, as a man spareth his own son that serveth him. Malachi 3:16-17, KJV. Thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? Psalm 56:8, KJV. Behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands. Thy walls are continually before me. Isaiah 49:16, KJV. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. Revelation 8:3-4, KJV. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. Hebrews 11:39-40, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. I want you to see 3 things there, and then I will let you rest. The first, the Lord hearkened and heard it. During the exact period when he said nothing, he was listening to everything. Silence on his side was never deafness on his side. He heard every conversation between 2 discouraged believers who were keeping each other going, and he thought enough of it to have it written down. The second, those prayers are still in the room. Look at what John sees in Revelation: an angel at the golden altar with a censer, and much incense given to him, and the smoke of it going up with the prayers of all saints. Not the prayers of the saints currently praying, all saints. Every prayer ever offered by every believer in every century is there, held, still ascending. Your prayers for your son are not evaporating into the ceiling of that room and dispersing. They are being collected. They will still be on that altar when you are not here to say them. That is the answer to the question you have been afraid to ask. Who prays for him when I am gone? Your prayers do not stop when you do. They are held before the throne, and they are still rising. And the third, graven upon the palms of my hands. Not written. Graven, cut in, permanent, the way you carve a name into stone, because you intend it to outlast you. And on the palms, where a hand cannot be opened or lifted or used for anything without the name being seen again, you are engraved, my child. You are in the book. And so is every prayer you have ever prayed alone. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Now, let me gather up everything we have walked through and put it in one place, because there is a single sentence in the New Testament that holds all 400 years inside it, and I want to hand it to you. But the ache first, and this one I suspect you have never said out loud in your life, because it feels close to blasphemy. It is the suspicion that God is late, not absent, not unwilling, late, that He will do it, probably someday in some form, but not in time, not while you are still here to see it. You are past the age where you can pretend the timeline is open-ended. You know roughly how much road is left, and so the prayer has changed shape in your mouth without your ever deciding to change it. It used to be, "Please do this." Now it is something more like, "Please, if there is any way, let me be here when you do." And underneath that, quieter still, the thought you would never say to anyone, "If it comes after I am gone, then for me it did not come at all." I want to walk you very slowly through what God had finished building by the year the silence ended, because I do not think you have ever seen it laid out in one piece. Start with language. Alexander had swept across the world 3 centuries earlier and left behind a common Greek that a merchant in Spain and a soldier in Syria and a scholar in Egypt could all speak. For the first and almost the only time in history, the civilized world had one language, and the scriptures had already been translated into it. Then roads. Rome had spent 2 centuries laying stone roads across the empire, 50,000 miles of them, built for legions, running from Britain to the Euphrates. A man could walk from Jerusalem to Rome on a paved surface and travel it in safety, because for the first time in memory, the seas had been cleared of pirates and the provinces held under one law. Historians call that stretch the Roman peace, and it began in the generation immediately before Christ and held for 200 years, the exact 2 centuries in which the gospel needed to move. Then, the meeting places, synagogues in every city, full of people who already knew the prophets. Then, the scattering, Jewish communities dispersed into every corner of the empire, so that when the Spirit fell at Pentecost, there were already devout men out of every nation under heaven standing in Jerusalem to hear it. Who would carry it home? Then, the exhaustion. A nation that had tried every political answer and had none left. A world tired of its own gods, full of people who no longer believed the old stories and had nothing to put in their place. Then the hunger. 400 years of unanswered longing, sharpened to a point. The expectation of a Messiah had never in all of Israel's history been so intense as it was in that generation. Every single one of those things took time. Not one of them could have been rushed. You cannot build 50,000 miles of road in a decade. You cannot spread a language across 3 continents in a generation. You cannot manufacture 4 centuries of longing. And when the last piece was in place, when the roads were finished, and the language was common, and the peace was holding, and the synagogues were full, and the hunger was at its height, a young woman in a village in Galilee had a visitor. Paul says it in 8 words, and they are among the most freighted words in Scripture. When the fullness of the time was come, not when the time was up, when it was full, like a vessel filling drop by drop over 400 years, and God watching the level rise, and not one drop wasted, and not one moment of it empty. And maybe, as you listen, you are counting your own remaining time and finding it too short for what you have asked for. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. Galatians 4:4-5, KJV. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:1, KJV. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. Ecclesiastes 3:11, KJV. But, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to us ward. Peter 3:8-9, KJV. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in his time. Isaiah 60:22, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look at the line in Ecclesiastes, because it explains something about you that you may have been blaming yourself for. He hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. God has put eternity in you, a capacity to sense that there is a whole design, a beginning and an end, a shape to things, and at the same time, he has made it impossible for you to trace it out. You can feel that there is a pattern. You cannot see it. That is not a defect in your faith. That is how you were made, deliberately, by him. So when you cannot make the pieces of your life add up to anything, you are not failing at something other believers succeed at. No man can find out the work, not one. And then, look at the last one, which is my favorite sentence about God's timing in all of Scripture, because it holds two things that should not fit together. I, the Lord, will hasten it in his time, hastening and waiting in the same breath. From where you stand, it is slow. From where he stands, it is being hurried. Both are true, and only one of them is visible to you. Now, my child, about the fear underneath all of this, that the answer may come after you are gone. I will not promise you what God has not promised, but I will say this: every one of those 19 generations died before the fullness of the time. Every one of them prayed for a thing they did not live to see, and Scripture says of them, with tenderness, that they received not the promise. And then add something astonishing. God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. They are not left out. They are waiting to be completed, together with everyone who came after. Their prayers were not answered in their lifetimes. Their prayers were answered in the story, and they are still inside the story, and they will see the whole of it. Not one of them missed it. They simply saw it from a different place than they expected to. You will not miss it either. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. We have come to the end of the 400 years, and I want to tell you how the silence broke. Because of all the ways God could have ended it, he chose this one. And the choosing is the whole message. Here is the ache we have been building toward. It is the prayer you no longer pray. There is one. There is something you asked God for, faithfully, urgently, for years, and at some point you stopped. Not in rebellion. You simply came to the end of your capacity to keep hoping in that particular direction, and you let it go, quietly, without telling anyone. the way you might finally put away a coat that no longer fits anyone in the house. Maybe it was a prayer for a child that never came, and then the years made it impossible, and the praying became too painful to continue. Maybe it was for a person you have now stopped expecting to change. Maybe it was for yourself, for a healing, for a calling, for a life that looked different from the one you got, and you feel something complicated about having stopped. Not guilt exactly, more like a low, settled sadness that some part of your believing life is now closed, and that you closed it yourself. Come with me to Jerusalem, into the temple, on a completely ordinary day around 6 or 5 years before the year we now count from. There's an old priest named Zacharias. He belongs to one of the 24 courses of priests, which means he serves in the temple 2 weeks a year. There are so many priests that the honor of burning incense in the holy place is assigned by lot, and a man could serve his whole life and never be chosen. Most were not. It was the sort of thing that happened to a priest once, if ever, and this time, in his old age, the lot falls on him. Picture it, because it is one of the most solemn moments a man of that world could have. He goes in alone. The whole multitude of the people are outside, praying at the hour of incense. He passes into the holy place with the coals and the incense, and there is the golden altar, and beyond it the veil, and behind the veil the room Pompey had walked into and found empty. He is standing in the most sacred space any living Jew may enter. On the one day of his entire life, he will ever stand there, in the 400th year of God's silence. And he is carrying something in with him, besides the incense. He and Elizabeth had no child. They had prayed for one, for years, and then for decades, and then they had stopped, because Elizabeth was well stricken in years, and there is a point past which you do not keep asking. That prayer was finished, closed. It had been closed for a long time. Everything about the moment is heavy with ceremony. Outside, the crowd is silent in the courts. Inside, the smoke begins to rise off the coals and fills the room, and the light comes from the lampstand only, and every priest who has ever done this has done it exactly this way for 1,000 years. There is nothing about the room to suggest that anything is different this time, and in that room, an angel is standing on the right side of the altar of incense. Now, hold on to this, because it is the detail that makes me stop every time. The angel is Gabriel, the same Gabriel who had come to Daniel by the river 500 years before. He had not been sent to a man since, and the first thing out of his mouth, after 400 years in which heaven had said nothing at all to anyone, is not a proclamation about empires. It is not a rebuke of the nation. It is not even, first, the announcement of the Messiah. It is this: "Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard." Thy prayer. Singular. The one this old man had prayed and abandoned. God broke 4 centuries of silence, and the first sentence he spoke was about the private, personal, given-up prayer of one elderly couple that nobody else in the world remembered. And maybe, as you listen, you are Zacharias in that room, carrying a prayer you closed years ago, standing somewhere you never expected to be, on an ordinary day that has nothing about it to suggest that anything is about to change. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. But the angel said unto him, "Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard. And thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John." Luke 1:13, KJV. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me, and heard my cry. Psalm 40:1, KJV. But verily God hath heard me. He hath attended to the voice of my prayer. Blessed be God, which hath not turned away my prayer, nor his mercy from me. Psalm 66:19-20, KJV. And it shall come to pass, that before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65:24, KJV. For with God nothing shall be impossible. Luke 1:37, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Thy prayer is heard. Notice the tense. Not thy prayer has just now been heard, as though it had been sitting unopened until this moment. It is heard, the state it has been in the entire time. The praying stopped decades ago in that house. The hearing never stopped at all. And I want you to see what Zacharias did, because it is the great mercy of this passage. He did not believe it. He argued. He asked for proof. I am an old man, and my wife well stricken in years. He was standing in the holy place, looking at an archangel, and he said, in effect, this cannot be true. And God gave him the sign he asked for. And the sign was silence. He could not speak until the child was born. 9 months of it. Think about the tenderness of that and the poetry of it. The man who could not believe the silence was ending was given a small silence of his own to live in, long enough to watch, without a word, as the impossible thing happened in his own house, day after day, until he had no doubt left in him. And when he could finally speak again, the first thing he did was prophesy. The first prophecy in Israel in 400 years came out of a man who had just spent 9 months unable to say anything. God did not punish his unbelief. He cured it. My child, if you have stopped praying for something, hear this carefully. That is not the same as God having stopped hearing it. Your capacity to keep asking is a human capacity, and it wears out as everything human does, and God has never once treated that as the withdrawal of the request. The prayer is on the altar. It is in the incense. It is still going up, and he is not offended if you find it hard to believe that. Zacharias could not believe it either, standing right in front of the answer. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say. To you, I have kept one person until now, and I have kept her on purpose, because of everyone in the whole 400 years. She is the one I most want you to meet. But let me name this ache carefully, because it belongs to a great many of the people who will hear this letter, and it is rarely spoken about with any respect. It is the ache of the long widowhood, and more broadly, the ache of the life that became quiet early and stayed quiet. Some of you lost your husband or your wife decades ago, not recently, decades, and the world has long since finished treating you as a person in grief. That season of casseroles and phone calls and people remembering the anniversary ended a very long time ago, and what replaced it was simply the rest of your life, lived alone, in a way nobody around you thinks of as remarkable, because it has gone on so long that it has become your ordinary. And in all those years you did something that no one saw. You kept faith. You went on praying. You went on going to the house of God. You went on believing in a goodness that had, from where you sat, taken something enormous from you and not replaced it. You did that for 30 years, or 50, or 60, without an audience, without a role, without anyone ever once saying, "Do you know what it costs to do what you have done?" And the question that sits underneath is not bitter. It is quieter than bitterness. It is simply, did anyone notice? Did any of it register anywhere? Or was it just a long private endurance that ends when I do? Her name was Anna. Luke gives her 5 sentences and then never mentions her again, and those 5 sentences are one of the most extraordinary things in Scripture. She was a prophetess. Her father's name was Phanuel, of the tribe of Aser, one of the northern tribes largely lost to history, which tells you she came from nowhere important. She had been married 7 years, and then her husband died, and she had been a widow of about 84 years. 84 years a widow. Sit with that number. She married young, as they did, and had 7 years of a life with someone, and then 84 years without him. She was well over 100 years old. And Luke tells us what she did with those 84 years. She departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. Not once, not for a season, for 84 years, an old woman in the temple courts, praying and fasting, present at every hour they were open. Generations of priests would have grown up seeing her there. She would have watched Herod's builders raise the great stones of the renovation year after year. She was there through the Hasmonean collapse and Pompey's desecration and the coming of Rome. She had prayed through more history than most nations live. And in all of that time, God said nothing to her. Not a word. She was praying inside the 400 years, in the last stretch of them, with no more evidence than anybody else had. And then, on one entirely ordinary day, a young couple from Nazareth came up the steps into the temple courts, poor enough that their offering was 2 turtle doves, the offering the law allowed for people who could not afford a lamb. They were carrying an infant, 40 days old, to present him to the Lord. There were other families there doing the same thing. It was the most routine ceremony in the temple's calendar. Old Simeon, who had been told by the Holy Ghost that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ, came in by the Spirit and took the child in his arms. And Luke says that Anna in that instant came in. In that instant. After 84 years of showing up, she walked into the right courtyard at the right moment on the one day in 400 years that it mattered. And she knew, immediately, an old woman with no position and no platform looked at a poor couple's baby and recognized the redemption of Israel. And then she went and told everyone in Jerusalem who was still waiting for him. She is the first evangelist of the New Testament, a widow of 100 and some years, who had done nothing for 8 decades but pray in a building. And maybe, as you listen, you have your own count of years, and no one has ever suggested to you that they were anything but time passing. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Aser. She was of a great age, and had lived with an husband 7 years from her virginity, and she was a widow of about 84 years, which departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers, night and day. Luke 2:36-37, KJV. And she coming in that instant gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spake of him to all them that looked for redemption in Jerusalem. Luke 2:38, KJV. Those that be planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing. Psalm 92:13-14, KJV. And even to your old age I am he, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear, even I will carry and will deliver you. Isaiah 46:4, KJV. Now, also, when I am old and gray-headed, O God, forsake me not, until I have showed thy strength unto this generation, and thy power to every one that is to come. Psalm 71:18, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. Still, it is a small word doing enormous work. It assumes an expectation that by now the fruit should have stopped, and overturns it. Anna's entire life's work happened in the last chapter of it, in a single afternoon, after 84 years of what any observer would have called an unproductive routine. And notice what made her ready. It was not that she was gifted, or well-connected, or in the right place by luck. It was that she had been there for 84 years. Presence over time was the whole of her qualification. She recognized him because she had spent a lifetime looking. Nobody develops that kind of sight in an afternoon. My child, I want to say something to you that I hope goes all the way down. The years you spent alone are not empty years. God did not lose track of a single one of them. Every stretch of quiet faithfulness you have put in, the unwitnessed prayers, the ordinary Sundays, the decades of showing up to a life that gave you very little back, is doing in you exactly what 84 years in the temple courts did in Anna. It is building the kind of eyes that can recognize God in an ordinary moment, when everybody else in the courtyard walks past him. And even to hoar hairs will I carry you, not until. 2. All the way through and out the other side. You have not been marking time. You have been being formed. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Now let me close the circle we opened at the beginning of this letter, because the last promise God made before he went silent is the first promise he kept when he spoke again, and he kept it in a way nobody would have chosen. The ache first, and this one is subtle, and it has cost a great many believing people their peace. It is the ache of not recognizing the answer. You asked God for help, and help may well have come, but it did not look like help. It looked like a person you did not want to have to depend on. It looked like a hard conversation. It looked like a change you resisted for 2 years before accepting. It looked like a smaller life that turned out to be the thing that saved you. Or, and this is the harder version, you have begun to wonder whether God has been answering you all along in forms you kept refusing because you had already decided what the answer would have to look like. You prayed for your family to be restored, and you were sent patience instead. You prayed to be relieved of something, and you were given company inside it. And a fear has taken shape. What if it has already come more than once, and I did not know it was him? And there is a grief in that thought that people rarely admit to. It is not the grief of being refused. It is the grief of having possibly been given something and not known it, of standing in a room where a gift was set down quietly and walking out again without seeing it. Let me take you to the seam between the testaments one more time. The very last thing God said, before 400 years of silence, was a promise about a messenger. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And then, in the final sentences of the Old Testament, he named him, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet. For 400 years, that promise sat there at the end of the scroll, and it was the most discussed, unfulfilled prophecy in Israel. Every generation looked for Elijah. They developed traditions about it. They set a place for him. When John began preaching, the first question the authorities sent to ask him was, plainly, "Art thou Elias?" Everybody was watching for that door to open. And now, consider how it actually opened. Not in Jerusalem, not in the temple, though it was announced there. Out in the wilderness of Judea, the barren country down toward the Jordan, rock and dust and heat, the emptiest place in the land. A man in a garment of camel's hair with a leather belt, eating locusts and wild honey, standing in a river. He had no position. He held no office. He was not a priest performing in the temple, though he was born to a priest and could have been. He wrote nothing. He did no miracle. John records explicitly that John did no miracle. He had no army, no institution, no credentials of any kind. He was a voice in a desert, and he was the fulfillment of the last promise of the Old Testament. And when they asked him who he was, that is exactly the word he used. "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness." Not a person of importance, a voice. 400 years of waiting for Elijah, and Elijah came in a way that was so unlike the expectation that the religious leadership of the nation, who had spent centuries studying the prophecy, could not accept it. Jesus said of him that he was the Elias which was for to come, and then added, with real grief, "if ye will receive it," because most of them would not. The promise came exactly as God had said it would, and the people who had been watching for it most intently were the ones who missed it, because it arrived in the wrong clothes. And maybe, as you listen, you have been watching for a specific shape of answer for so long that you would not know a different one if it stood in front of you. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words, "The voice of Him that crieth in the wilderness, Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God." Isaiah 43, KJV. "Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it." Isaiah 40, 4-5, KJV. "And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Luke 1:17, KJV. He said, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, Make straight the way of the Lord, as said the prophet Esaias." John 1:23, KJV. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Isaiah 55:8-9, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. My thoughts are not your thoughts. That verse gets quoted so often that we have worn the edges off it, so let me put it back the way it was meant. It is not a shrug. It is not God saying you would not understand, so stop asking. Read the 2 verses just before it in Isaiah, and you will find they are about mercy, about God abundantly pardoning a man who returns to Him. The higher ways are not colder ways. They are kinder ways than we would have thought to ask for, which means the reason you did not recognize the answer is not that God is inscrutable and remote. It is that He is more generous than the version of the answer you had drawn up. And there is a great comfort hidden in the way the silence ended, and I want to hand it to you before we go on. 400 years of waiting did not end with a book. It did not end with a new law or a system or a set of instructions for what to do next. It ended with a person standing in a river telling everyone that someone was coming, and then, a few weeks later, with that someone walking down the bank toward him. God's answer to 4 centuries of silence was not information. It was presence. My child, I think you have been asking for information. Most of us do, after long enough. Why is this happening? How long will it be? What am I supposed to do? Those are honest questions, and I am not going to shame you for asking them. The Psalms are full of them. But the pattern of the whole story is that the answer God gives, when He finally gives it, is almost never an explanation. It is Himself. That is what He gave to Job out of the whirlwind. It is what He gave to Israel at the Jordan. It is what He gave to a world that had waited 400 years. Do not be so fixed on the shape of the answer you asked for that you miss the one who is the answer. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. There is one question left in the 400 years, and it is the one that actually matters. We have talked about what God was building. We have not yet answered where He was. And that is your question too, my child. Underneath everything else in this letter, that is the one you have been carrying. Not what is God doing. Where was He? Where was He in the room where you sat up with someone through the worst of it? Where was He in the year everything came apart and no help came? Where was He during the long stretch when you kept going to church and going through the motions and feeling absolutely nothing, and you never told a soul? Because what do you say? That you have believed for 60 years and cannot feel Him at all? And it is not a rebellious question. That is what I most want you to understand. It is the question of someone who believes He exists and believes He is good and simply cannot reconcile that with a particular room, a particular year, a particular stretch of their own history. Job asked it. David asked it. The Lord Himself asked it from the cross in the words of a psalm, so that no believer would ever again have to ask it alone. That question does not need a strategy. It needs an answer, and Scripture gives one, and it is not what most people expect. Come to the opening of John's Gospel. Matthew begins with a genealogy. Luke begins with Zacharias in the temple. Mark begins in the wilderness. But John does something none of the others do. He steps back past all of it, past Bethlehem, past Malachi, past Abraham, past the creation of the world, and he begins with a sentence that reaches behind everything that exists. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then, all things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. Now think about what John is doing there, because he is answering the 400-year question directly, and most readers walk straight past it. Everyone in his world assumed that the story of Jesus started at Bethlehem, that He arrived, that before that moment He was not here, and then He came. And John says, no, He did not arrive. He was never not here. He was in the beginning. Everything that exists was made by Him. He is before all things, and by Him all things consist. That word means He is the reason everything holds together, continuously, at every moment, which means this, and I want you to take it slowly. Through every one of those 400 silent years, Christ was. He was there when Malachi laid down the pen. He was there in the caves of the hill country with Mattathias. He was there in the room in Alexandria, while 70 scholars argued over a Greek word. He was there when the pig burned on the altar, and heaven did not answer. He was in that room, and he was holding the world together while it happened, and he said nothing. He was there when Pompey pulled back the veil and found an empty chamber, and concluded there was no God in it. He was there in the temple courts through 84 years of an old woman's prayers. He was not absent for 4 centuries and then born. He was present for 4 centuries and then revealed. And the words John uses for it are stunning. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. That word for dwelt means he pitched his tent, he tabernacled. It is the language of the wilderness, of God putting up a tent in the middle of the camp so he could live where the people lived. The one who had been holding the universe together in silence set up his tent in the middle of the street, in a body, in a village, and let people see him. And when the writer of Hebrews describes what happened, he frames the whole 400 years in a single phrase: God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son. The silence was not God running out of things to say. It was God saving what he had to say for a form no prophet could carry. And maybe, as you listen, you have been asking where he was in your own quiet years. And the answer is the same answer, and it has been the answer the entire time. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words: In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. John 1:1-3, KJV. And the Word was made flesh, and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John 1:14, KJV. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds. Hebrews 1:1-2, KJV. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. Colossians 1:17, KJV. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. Micah 5:2, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look at the last one, because Micah wrote it 700 years before it happened and packed the entire mystery into one line. He names the town Bethlehem, a place so small it barely registered. And then in the same sentence he says of the child who will be born in that small town that his goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. A baby with a beginning in Bethlehem and no beginning at all. That is the answer to where God was during the silence, written down 400 years before the silence even started. My child, here is what I want you to carry out of this into the room you are sitting in. You have been asking where he was, and the question assumes something that is not true. It assumes that the years you could not feel him were years he was elsewhere. But feeling has never been the measurement. He is before all things, and by him all things consist. He was holding together the atoms of the chair you sat in on the worst day of your life. He was sustaining the breath you used to pray a prayer you thought went nowhere. There has not been 1 second of your life, or of those 400 years in which he was not actively holding everything you are made of in place. You have never been in a room he was not in. You have only been in rooms where you could not perceive him. Those are not the same thing, and the difference is the whole of your peace. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Let me bring the whole of it home now, to your chair, to your room, to the thing you actually came to this letter carrying, because you have your own 400 years. It has a different length and a different shape, but you have one. Everyone who has believed for a long time does. Maybe yours is a person. There is a name you have said to God more than any other name in your life, and nothing has moved. Maybe yours is a condition, something in your body or your mind that you asked to be delivered from 30 years ago and were not. Maybe yours is a hope you had for what your life would be, a shape you were sure it was going to take, and it did not, and you made peace with that so long ago that you would not know how to grieve it now, even if someone gave you permission. Maybe yours is simply the loss of the felt presence of God, the warmth that used to be there when you prayed, gone so gradually that you cannot name the year. And whichever one it is, you have probably done what every long-believing person eventually does with it. You stopped bringing it up, not to God only, to everyone. It became the thing you no longer mention at the table, the subject you steer around when someone asks how you are, the private country you live in that nobody visiting your house would ever guess was there. You became fluent in talking about everything else, and in the middle of it, the same question the people in Jerusalem asked for 20 generations. Is anything happening at all? So let me put the whole letter into your hands in one piece. Every single thing that made the coming of Christ possible was built in the silence. The language the gospel would be preached in, built in the silence. The scriptures in that language ready on the shelves, built in the silence. The roads it would travel, built in the silence. The peace that let it travel safely, built in the silence. The synagogues in every city that gave it its first pulpits, built in the silence. The scattered communities who would carry it home from Pentecost, built in the silence. The exhaustion of every other hope, worked out in the silence. The hunger that made a whole generation ready to receive him, grown in the silence. The faithful remnant who would recognize him, formed, one household at a time, across 20 unrecorded generations, in the silence. Not one of those things could have been done quickly. Not one of them was visible from the ground, and no one living through it, not one person in 400 years, could have told you that God was doing anything at all. They were living inside the most productive period in the history of redemption, and every one of them would have described it as nothing happening. My child, that is the fact I want to leave in your hands. Not a promise about what God is going to do in your circumstances next year. I do not know that, and you should be careful of anyone who claims to. Something better, because it is certain. The felt emptiness of a season is not, and has never been, evidence about what God is doing in it. The people best positioned to judge the 400 years were the most wrong about them of anyone who has ever lived. Now go back to the page. Find the end of Malachi again, the last promise, the messenger who was coming, the fathers and the children, and turn the leaf. There is Matthew, and a genealogy, and then a young woman in Nazareth, and then a stable. 400 years. and in your Bible they are the thickness of one sheet of paper. 20 generations of unanswered prayer, empires rising and falling, altars defiled and cleansed, an old woman praying in a temple for 84 years. All of it, from where you are sitting now, is the sound of a page turning. That is what God's perspective on a long silence looks like. And one day, not here, but one day, the stretch you are living in now will look exactly the same from the other side. One leaf, one turn, and on the far side of it, the whole of what he was doing, laid out and obvious, and every hard year of it accounted for. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee." Hebrews 13:5, KJV. And the Lord, he it is that doth go before thee. He will be with thee. He will not fail thee, neither forsake thee. Fear not, neither be dismayed. Deuteronomy 31:8, KJV. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Isaiah 41:10, KJV. Cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. For ye have need of patience, that after ye have done the will of God, ye might receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come, and will not tarry. Hebrews 10:35-37, KJV. Being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. Philippians 1:6, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. He hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. And look at how the writer of Hebrews introduces it. Not I promise you, not I believe, but he hath said. Past tense. It was said once, long ago, and the writer treats it as still standing, still binding, still in force, centuries later, for people the speaker never met. That is exactly the logic of the 400 years. God said a thing to Malachi, and then said nothing for 4 centuries, and the thing he said stood the entire time, and came to pass to the letter. He does not need to repeat himself for it to hold. He hath said, it is finished business. And the last one, I want that to be the line you rest on in the quiet hours, whenever the old ache comes back around, and the room goes still, and the same question begins to form. He which hath begun a good work in you will perform it, will carry it through, will complete it, will finish what he started in you, whatever it looks like, from where you are standing, whatever your eyes report, however long the quiet runs. He started it. He is not going to leave it half-built. He never has, not once, not in 400 years, not in yours. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say, to you. And now, my child, we come to the end of this letter. Let me leave 2 small things in your hands before the seal. The first, make sure the next letter finds you. If this one has been company to you, if it has said something in the quiet that needed saying, the subscription is a single tap just below, and it costs you nothing at all. It keeps your place in the family of these letters. And beside it, there is a small bell. Turn it on, and the next letter will come to you the moment it is opened, instead of getting lost among 1,000 other things. 1 tap and 1 bell. That is all. And if you are willing, there is someone you know who is living in their own 400 years right now. Someone praying into a quiet they have begun to fear, certain that they are the only one who has ever felt this. You do not need to find the right words for them. You rarely can, with an ache this deep. Hand them this letter instead. Let it say what is hard to say. And one thing more. For the family gathering in the comments below, finish this sentence. Father, thank you for. Write it however it comes. Let the next reader who arrives in their own long silence see what the faithful were still thankful for in theirs. Before that, though, let me say one last thing to you directly, as a friend and not as a teacher. I do not know how long your silence has run, or how much of it is still ahead. Nobody does. The psalmist said as much, and God let the sentence stand. But I know what the 400 years proved, and it is the only thing I would want you to keep if you kept nothing else from this letter. The quiet was never the absence of God. It was the shape His work took when it was too large to be watched. And now, the seal. Everything the Father said to you in this letter, He said in His own words. Every promise was Scripture. Not one line of comfort was invented. All of it was already written, long before you were born, and every line of it carried your name. The voice you heard beneath my voice was His, and it does not change, and it does not fade, and it does not fall silent, not truly, not ever, not even in the centuries when no one can hear it. Take the whole of it with you now. Take the last promise at the end of Malachi that stood unbroken for 400 years. Take the still small voice after the wind and the earthquake and the fire. Take the old men weeping over a small foundation that would one day hold the Christ. Take the goat that crossed the earth without touching the ground, written down 200 years before he was born. Take the 70 tired scholars in Alexandria, building a road they never knew they were building. Take the psalm that says nobody knows how long, preserved by God Himself, so you would never be ashamed of asking. Take the old country priest at Modine who refused, and the lamps that were lit again 3 years later, and the courts where Christ would walk. Take the little sanctuary in the countries where they shall come. Take the book of remembrance opened at the doorway of the silence. Take the fullness of the time. Take the first sentence spoken after 400 years. Fear not, thy prayer is heard. Take the widow of 84 years who walked in at that instant. Take the voice in the wilderness. Take the Word who was there the whole time, holding every silent century together in His hands, and take the one thin page in your own Bible, 400 years wide, that turns in less than a second. Fold it all inside your heart and keep it there for the quiet hours when you need it most. May you carry this letter with you, folded inside your heart, sealed by His promise. This was a letter from the Father. Every word He spoke was Scripture, and every word was for you. Until the next letter, you are loved, you are seen, and you are His.